Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're back on the Scania upgrades. Last time we took it to bits, so this time we can start on the mods. First, a quick little update on the roof. I've spliced in some standard servo lead to the beacon light. It uses an RC channel to change its modes, and it looks a lot neater than it did before. Also, I've soldered up some resistors to the 4 LED light bar. One resistor per LED rather than 2 LEDs in series as they were before. They should be a bit brighter now and they won't be at risk of future failure. Now for the good stuff, speakers. I've got a pair of 8 ohm, 5 watt, 50mm speakers. The light controller only has a single output, but we can wire them so they work together. 2 8 ohm speakers wired up in parallel will look the same as a single 4 ohm speaker, which is perfect for the built-in amplifier. And having the 2 speakers should shift a bit more air than just the one. They're going to mount up in the roof of the cab, and if they're right at the front edge of the hole, they should clear all the bits they need to. To mount them, I've printed up a panel that fills the hole and mounts up to the screw holes that are already there. We just need to clip the sprue out and remove the small screw that attaches the dangly silver thing in the middle. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get the dimension spot on. I think I simply forgot to add some tolerances, so it's a fraction of a millimetre over size. After a quick bit of sanding, it is a perfect fit though, so it could be worse. To fit, we just use some M3 screws up through the bottom and some Starlock washers and M3 nuts on the top. You could use nylock nuts, but they'd still really want some plain washers under them, and thread lock wouldn't be ideal as it will attack the plastic. With all 4 installed, that's the plate fitted. To refit the silver dangly thing, we'll need to drill a hole through the small hole to make a hole in the tab on the plate. It's an M2 thread, so a 2mm hole should do the trick. Then from the inside we offer up the dangly bit and thread in the screw. Not too tight though, as we don't want to damage the metal loop. Now on the top we just pop on the nut to lock it in place. To get all the wiring down from the roof into the cab, we're going to need a hole. We want it right in the back corner, so the wires will go down behind the interior and be nicely hidden from view. The speakers are a tight fit in the panel, but to make sure that they don't pop out, we'll end up using something to stick them in. Now we don't want to use CA, as there's a good chance it could gum up the speaker. Epoxy would be okay, but it tends to end up going very hard, so it could crack. No, I think we're going to use some silicone. Now this stuff's really meant for making an instant gasket for oily bits on a full-size car, and it does take ages to go off, but it does stick surprisingly well and remains flexible, so it should last a very long time. Off camera, I've soldered some wires to the speaker. Now remember they're wired in parallel, so the terminals marked with a plus are connected together, and the terminals with a minus are connected together too. To keep the wires tidy and out of trouble, I've used a bit of hot glue. It sticks well, but if you really need to, it's not too much of a problem to peel it off. Before we put the roof back on, I've got some polyester wadding to stuff the box with. Now I'm not sure how much difference it's going to make, but the theory goes it should make it sound a little bit less tinny, which is always a problem with these RC trucks. It's worth noting though, make sure you get fire retardant polyester. If there's ever an electrical problem, the plain stuff will literally go up like a torch. You can test it by simply trying to light it. At worst, you'll get a small flame that should go out almost immediately. If you get lots of fire and smoke, don't use it. Now we can feed the light bar and beacon wires down through the hole and locate the roof box on the top of the cab. Then on the inside, reinstall the 4 self-tappers. Just like all good installs, there's not really much to see now it's all back together. If I did the original build, I think I would have tried a bit harder to hide the holes around the light bar, but they're not too bad. There's a couple more bits to refit before the cab's complete. There's the dashboard that needs a couple of M3 screws and nuts. The seats are mounted to the chassis on this build, so it's just a case of offering up the dash, popping in the screws and doing up the nuts. Next there's the main grille that goes on the front, and that gets attached with 2 more self-tappers. That's the cab ready to fit when we get there then, except it isn't. we've got this edge lit panel that goes on the back. To fit, we're going to need to make a mount, most likely using the 2 screw holes already there. There's also the gearbox cover to think about. Now this one's got MAN logos on it, so we won't be fitting it, but it's important that we make sure it'll fit just in case the owner ends up with a correctly branded one. I'm going to refit the cab to the chassis with the 2 self-tappers through the metal hinge plate into the front cross member. These are always a bit awkward to get in, especially the first one. You have to hold the weight of the cab while trying to get the holes to line up. Always a bit of a faff. The gearbox cover sits on the end of the gearbox and uses the screws that mount the gearbox to the chassis and 2 of the screws that mount the end plate to the gearbox. For now, we'll just hold it in place so we can check clearances. As it turns out, there's loads of space where we want to fit the panel, so there's no problem there. I've 3D printed a mount that sits just behind the metal bracket and fits almost flush to the cab. Unfortunately, I had a memory card error in the camera just as I was going to do a test fit. But it did fit though, so it's now off getting a coat of white paint. We'll probably see it again in the next video. Front bumper next, and I've gone and rewired it off camera. All the LEDs have been replaced with new ones, and each one has its own resistor, including a rework of the Lisu light bar. The whole setup should be brighter and long-term more reliable. The loom has 3 red wires for 5 volts, 1 per cluster and 1 for the light bar. And there's 7 grounds, headlights, side lights, 2 pairs of fogs at the bottom, left and right indicators and the light bar. They'll end up with a connector at the end that plugs straight into the light controller. And on a related note, I did used to try and film the whole soldering process, but it does take quite a bit of time to get anywhere, so I've been doing it off camera lately. However, I'm thinking about starting some live streams. So when I'm doing stuff that doesn't make it into the videos, we can hang out and I can maybe answer some questions. Next then, with the cab removed from the chassis again, we can address the other bit of wiring, the motor wires. They're functional as they are, but they're a bit untidy. There's also a splice between the ESC and the bullet connectors, which isn't really ideal. I'm just going to cut the wires next to the splice and replace the rest with some new wire and some gold connectors. Not only does it look a lot neater, but once we zip tie the wires to the chassis rail, there's no chance of them getting caught up in the suspension or the wheels. It's not just about the looks, making it all nice and clean has practical benefits too. The front tray and the wings can get refitted now. It just uses 6 M3x6s down into the top of the chassis rail. It'll probably have to come off again yet, but it's important to do test fits regularly just in case something gets missed. The front bumper wiring should go up and under the tray and pop up just by the gearbox. There's some excess wire length there, so we'll be able to comfortably move the bumper to the side to attach the cab to the chassis. If the length was a bit tight, it does make reassembly far more difficult than it really needs to be. There's one more thing today. We're going to refit the interior so we can get an idea how much space we have for the electronics. We'll need to make some sort of mount for the light controller so it's securely held in position. Also, it'll need somewhere for the receiver to go. I think that's going to be another job for the 3D printer. So that's it for this week then. All that's left is to mention that I've set up a Discord server. I've put an invite link in the description if you want to join in. I'm going to limit the number of invites, so it's going to be first come first serve, and if we run out I'll put up a new link next week. And for those that don't know what Discord is, it's a live chat service that works in a web browser, a desktop application, or even mobile. Hopefully we can chat about RC and other stuff, share pictures, and generally nerd out. So, as always then, thanks for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a message if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!